Attraction is a major driving force of humanity. Thousands of years ago, while men found ways to gain power through combat, women did the same with seduction. There's been plenty of overlap in history, but combat is decidedly masculine and seduction is decidedly feminine. From Cleopatra, with her godlike image and overwhelming presence, to Queen Elizabeth I, who was able to use courtship and attraction for massive political favors all without doing the deed, to Marilyn Monroe, who captured the hearts of millions through the big screen. Seduction is naturally a part of civilization. However, new advancements in tech provide new ways to commodify lust and attraction. Long gone are the days when a dirty magazine from a sketchy store need to be bought to access such material. Anyone with a phone can have instant access to endless adult content for free, and if they're willing to pay, a more personalized and parasocial experience is available as well. This video aims to take a big picture approach to the modern adult entertainment industry, from consumption and creation to psychology, culture, and beyond. So what's the problem? Why does this topic deserve some thought? As far as many are concerned, there aren't any issues with adult content. Some even believe it's been empowering. But if we look at the world and data around us, it's clear that many of us aren't doing too well mentally or socially. Mental health issues are on the rise, as well as the political and ideological divide between men and women. Problems with loneliness, body image, and self-esteem are all too common. Today's dating world has become a hellscape of bad advice, terrible apps, hostility, and disappointment. This isn't to jump to the conclusion that the adult entertainment industry is to blame for all of these problems. However, adult content is in proximity to all of these issues in one way or another, and considering how serious these problems are, it would be irresponsible not to question what impact adult entertainment has had on society. The adult entertainment industry in and of itself is a bit of a mess. Because there aren't many statistics or studies on these issues, it's hard to say how much of a mess it is. According to Live Science, there are a few reasons why this is the case. First, the people who work in the industry usually stay for only about 6 to 18 months. Second, there aren't a ton of models working at one particular time. Here it says 1,000, but that seems very low to me. Maybe the high turnover rate has something to do with it, or they're talking about a specific part of the industry. Lastly, models are reluctant to participate in studies and surveys because they're concerned that the information may be used against them and their line of work. Along with the lack of transparency and information, there's room for exploitation, corruption, and even violence in that kind of environment. Some models have come forward to talk about these issues, although it's difficult to tell how frequently they happen. Some problems are studio-specific, while others are industry-wide, though the industry has been expanding beyond the studio. Apparently, at one time, San Fernando Valley, California would produce 90% of American legally made adult content. This stat came from an HBO series which released in 2006. Maybe this was the part of the industry that 1,000 stars at a time figure came from earlier. While San Fernando Valley still puts out a lot of adult films, it's not exactly the monopoly it was back in the days of Hugh Hefner and Playboy. The rise of the internet has made independent production more possible than ever, which alleviates some problems and introduces some new ones. The good news is that the potential of violence and unfair exploitation from studios is decreased. There are still marketing and management agencies for sites like OF, but I would imagine it's much more of a hands-off approach compared to what it's like in San Fernando Valley. It's important to note that these risks are still present, as The Hub admitted to hosting underage content made by traffickers in a recent lawsuit. I imagine the risk of this kind of thing happening is lower on OF than with more standard studio setups though. The bad news is that with new technology comes new ways to take advantage of marketing psychology. This leads us to the simp economy. So what is the simp economy? I think of it as a subset of the attention economy. As much as I don't like Gary Vee, there's some truth behind the phrase that plays at the start of all of his videos.
Attention is the #1 asset.
Attention is the #1 asset. Day trading attention. The idea being that if you can maintain a large number of people's attention, you can market to them or run advertisements, like in this video. I don't have a problem with advertisements themselves. People need to find a way to sell their products. But some people, like Gary Vee, take this to the extreme, using consistent misleading calls to action and shady promotions to sell his NFTs, which were a disaster. Side note, it looks like Lana Rhoades has engaged in some sketchy crypto business of her own.
So Lana Rhoades just rug pulled her NFT project and ran away with $1.5 million. Now she's claiming it's not her fault. her community was just getting too negative for her.
Blatant scams aren't the only way to exploit people's attention. The psychology behind variable reward is what makes things like loot crates and gambling so addictive for some. I've talked about variable reward in another video, but in a nutshell, the sense of the unknown and a potential win is more exciting and rewarding than what is predictable. Spending in general is fun for many, but buying something like a new watch is psychologically different than sitting down at a slot machine. When you pay the person at the counter for the watch, you know what you're getting. There's no game involved, there's no sense of possible victory, just the purchase of a product. At the slot machines, every pull is a chance to win. While it costs money, it's a low-effort way of chasing a possible reward. The chase of a reward itself is a big part of the appeal of gambling and why some struggle with it. How does this all relate to OF? The way much of the content is sold is similar to the way loot crates work. You don't know what you're going to get until you buy the picture or video. If you're paying for them to message you, you don't know when they might respond or what they're going to say next. The variable reward here isn't as extreme as it is in gambling, but coupled with the erotic and parasocial aspects of OF, and there's a potential risk of obsession, addiction, and antisocial behavior. This is what drives the simp economy. While it's a good thing models aren't at as much risk as they used to be, there's still a lot we don't understand about social media and parasocial relationships, let alone the kinds that take place on sites like OF. With the changing industry and culture come a different set of issues. There are many narratives and disagreements surrounding adult entertainment in media. After all, it's a divisive subject. In 2019, for the first time in America, a poll from various large organizations found that a majority of the country supports decriminalizing work, with much of the support coming from Democrats and those under 45. The poll overall shows 52% supporting decriminalization, which means opinions on this are still divided but have been moving in a progressive direction. This reflects in the variety of narratives in media surrounding the topic. I'll elaborate on some of these points more later, but here are some of the common ways people have been arguing for and against adult content. Many religions don't specifically condemn erotic material in their texts, likely because it wasn't really a thing thousands of years ago, at least not in the capacity it is today. Still, there are passages which have to do with lust and adultery, both things that most religious groups speak out against. For example, in Christianity, the book of Matthew reads, "Ye have heard that it was said by them of old time, Thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say unto you that whoever looketh on a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart." It's easy to see the relation between these verses and the condemnation of consuming adult content. Marriages between those who watch erotic material are up to twice as likely to fail than those that don't, making it a threat to the family unit. Some speculate that marital issues lead to the consumption of adult content and not the other way around, although that would mean, at best, it's at least a sign of a failing marriage. Plus, if your marriage was already on the rocks, lusting after other women doesn't help. While I agree with the importance of the family unit, adult entertainment is so widespread and accepted that I don't think the more strict religious angle is all too effective. The message may connect with other believers, but many non-religious folks find this approach to be outdated, oppressive, and cringe. When the opposition doesn't take your message seriously, you're basically preaching to the choir. This is probably the most common narrative in favor of the industry: female empowerment. There are a few common themes behind empowerment here, the first being that work can be a lucrative option, especially for women. According to a recent report, the global adult entertainment market was valued at $58 billion in 2022 and is projected to reach $96 billion by 2032. I couldn't find a solid statistic, but an estimate I found said there could be up to 7 female performers for every male performer, making it largely a woman's industry. Conversely, those who consume adult content are mostly men. In a world of economic uncertainty, people will gravitate towards lucrative options which don't have educational requirements, especially if they're happy with the work environment. While there are exploitative and harmful studios out there, many women in the industry report a sense of freedom or liberation in their work. The prospect of making more money than a 9-to-5 with less hours and more control over those hours is appealing. Some women also see this line of work as an opportunity to express and represent lust and desire in a more positive light. Ultimately, we shouldn't feel shame and attraction. It's what's kept humanity going for all of these years. But surely there must be some consequence of giving into our desires so readily. For many, the term nofap is associated with another, less savory term, but these classifications aren't meant to be derogatory, just accurate and of the times. The nofap community mostly focuses on the psychological impacts of watching and fapping to adult content. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter and a word that has been tossed around in media a lot these days. I'll get into this more later, but in a nutshell, dopamine is responsible for pleasure, which drives motivation and learning. Since watching adult content is an easy way to spike dopamine levels, there are concerns of addiction and a general lack of drive. Another issue the nofap community talks about is how watching other people engage in intercourse affects us. There is a big difference between experiencing intimacy and watching whatever raunchy content you can find. If a man becomes accustomed to watching adult content before they're even comfortable talking to women, that can lead to some serious relationship issues down the line. Abstaining from the gooner lifestyle is the solution for the nofap community. A problem some have with this narrative is that it sometimes ignores the idea of romance altogether. While I agree that adult content can lead people away from social development, that doesn't mean that when you stop watching it, you'll instantly know how to talk to girls. There's more going on here. On the other hand, we have gooners, gooning. To goon or not to goon? That is the question. For the gooners, of course, the answer is to goon. Gooning is an increasingly popular term used to describe, well, in less explicit words, lusting after others, jacking it, edging, spanking the monkey. For gooners, all that's really important is that fun is being had. It is the hedonistic perspective, a very simple approach to something far more complicated. I'm using the term prudes here to describe the group of people who have cultural concerns with the modern adult entertainment industry, which is a group that overlaps with many others. Some religious, some subsects of feminism, some of the nofap community, the list goes on. The prudes are concerned with the over-sexualized nature of media and the impacts it could have on society. The sort of lustful exploitation is not the kind of content we should be subjecting ourselves or our kids to, which is becoming far too accessible and difficult to avoid. Girls who are just turning 18 or are in financial trouble are enticed by a call to action from the adult entertainment industry. Objectification is normalized for the sake of short-term gratification and profit. Social media is flooded with provocative content. The divide between men and women continues to grow. Having a prude approach to this topic can come off as preachy and condescending to those that disagree, similar to the religious angle. As the poll showed earlier, more and more people are coming out in favor of decriminalizing work. For some, it's a serious social issue. For others, controversy is opportunity. The word clout has a negative and desperate connotation. The reality is, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who isn't in search of popularity, influence, or power in one way or another. Searching for clout is a rather human thing to do. It's how we seek out that power that makes the difference. These are some examples of the way e-celebrities use degeneracy for viewership. Adam22 was once known for his involvement in the world of hip-hop. His podcast, No Jumper, has been incredibly successful and has helped launch the careers of up-and-coming rappers. Nowadays, he's mostly known for letting other men sleep with his wife. To be clear, this isn't just a personal lifestyle choice or an exposed interaction, it is a deliberate branding decision. This change in image was most pronounced with this infamous video, which many of you have probably seen.
Hey guys, guess who I'm shooting with today? It's finally happening. Wow, I did not know you were going to do that.
Lena the Plug, Adam22's wife, is a director, a promoter, and an actor in the adult entertainment industry. This was the first time she was shooting with a man other than her husband, Adam. This, of course, attracted attention and ridicule across social media. As more jokes were made at his expense, he decided to double down on degeneracy. What started as leaning into the joke with some tweets turned into the production of a reality show where the winner gets to, well, sleep with Adam's wife.
What was it like for the first time, maybe in your life, but definitely in the last 7 years, to have two dudes nut on your face?
So why would someone want to put themselves through such public embarrassment? Publicity and marketing, even if it's at the cost of reputation.
I'm not above doing something for money. She's definitely not above doing something for money, you know?
Yeah, I guess you guys have
do a lot of stuff for money.
But like at what point?
I'll sit here and read a brand deal for something I never even heard of.
Yeah.
For money.
Whether or not they expected such a high level of virality from the first video isn't important because they continued to double down in their behavior. Adam22 realized the potential for further success after Lena's first video with another man, which led to the creation of the godforsaken reality monstrosity that is For the Love of Lena. This is probably the most common form of degeneracy for clout, to provide more controversial and depraved content for the sake of attention. Another example of this kind of behavior would be the sale of Belle Delphine's bathwater. The confusing idea of buying a gamer girl's bathwater is striking enough on its own to market itself, oddly enough. Not only did she sell all of her stock for an estimated 18 grand, she was able to use the publicity from the stunt to go on to create a multi-million-dollar OF career. Degeneracy attracts attention, which can be turned into a business. This doesn't mean that you need to be the one debasing yourself to capitalize off such attention though, which brings us to our next example. Fresh and Fit is a red pill podcast focused on relationships. It's an absolute shit show. If you're tuning in for Jerry Springer-esque drama and a laugh, it can be pretty entertaining at times, but I wouldn't watch it to try to get an accurate idea of what the dating world is actually like. The format of their show is to have on guests, usually controversial men and OF models. The men have their own segment to talk about politics, culture, etc. Then they have on the women, which is usually the point where things start to get more heated. The clashing of traditional and progressive views on relationships is the fuel to this drama. It's not a problem if someone has a discussion with someone they disagree with on stream. Even though Fresh and Fit speak out against sites like OF, it's still okay for them to have OF models on their platform. Here's the problem. Fresh and Fit is based in Miami, the city with the most OF models per capita. A large portion of the women they have on the show are OF models. The kind of women that wind up on Fresh and Fit are usually not going to be anything like the average woman in the real world. This is good for having a consistent, unique, and combative dynamic with guests for the sake of entertainment. This is awful for showing men what women are really like. The average woman on Fresh and Fit is going to be far more clumsy and indecent than the average woman you meet at, let's say, a business conference. But the women on Fresh and Fit are presented as what men should expect. If Fresh and Fit didn't take themselves so seriously, then this wouldn't be a problem. Since dating advice and relationship perspectives are at the core of the Fresh and Fit brand, this is an issue. With the materialistic, misleading representation of women and heavy-handed takes on relationships, the show prioritizes flair over utility. Once again, this wouldn't be a problem if they packaged their content as entertainment instead of practical advice. There are plenty of other podcasts and YouTube channels that go for this more indirect form of degeneracy for clout, most notably Just Pearly Things and the Whatever podcast. Their goal is to overrepresent degeneracy, further justifying their cause against it. Some may say they're shining a light on a problem, but their message has been beaten like a dead horse. Speaking of horses, leftist political streamer Vaush has recently found himself in quite the pickle. He pulled an Atrioc and accidentally showed a certain folder of his while live streaming. It was his goon folder. While Atrioc was caught with Pokimane deepfakes, Vaush was caught with something that was more sinister in a different way. Depictions of underage girls, one with a horse drawn by someone who is known for these kinds of, illustrations. If you've known about Vaush for a while, this may not be all that surprising. There have been clips of him going around making some disturbing arguments, seemingly in favor of relationships with minors and underage material. Given this history, Vaush is left looking horrible. Some of his fellow streamers came to his defense, but it wound up hurting their reputation more than it helped his. When Vaush addresses this live on stream, he claims to have overlooked the fact that the drawing on his hard drive is of a child, that he saw her as a goblin short stack.
When I looked at it, I think the vibe that I got was like short stack, thick kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like the way like goblins get drawn in.
A few days later, Vaush uploads a 2-hour explanation video, mostly focusing on the context of the old clips of him. For some of these clips, the context helped his case a little, for others I wasn't convinced. In fact, he cuts context out of one of the most egregious clips, and the cut made is definitely favorable to him.
We've all jerked it at some point or another. We have at some point in our lives been going crazy on some site, and we've been stroking as hard and fast as we can, and then after we nut, we go back, look over our history chat, and we go like, oh geez, oh boy, some of these girls looked pretty young.
Yeah, this one definitely sounds rougher than the last two clips, but it's you know, it's a bit, it's a joke, a bad joke.
We've all jerked it at some point or another. We've all, well, you don't have a, we have at some point in our lives been going crazy on some site. We go back, look over our history chat, and we go like, oh geez, oh boy, some of these girls looked pretty young. Okay, I don't give a fuck.
It's odd that in a video that's so much about context, he decides to leave this out. Without him saying that he doesn't care, it might be a bit easier to see this clip as a joke. Maybe. But with him saying he doesn't care, it seems more like a crazed confession, not some way to draw attention to a serious issue.
The intended comedy element of an indiscriminate whirlwind masturbator being used to draw attention to a problem, that problem being the ubiquity of in sites.
I am not convinced that Vaush was unaware of what kind of material he had on his hard drive, although this doesn't really have to do with degeneracy for clout. Vaush's reputation has suffered greatly due to all of this, and it certainly wasn't an intentional publicity stunt. The reason why I bring all of this drama up is because of one of Vaush's general defenses.
It does implicate me, but not as a pedophile. Rather, as a idiot debate bro brain poisoned jackass, because I took a perfectly fine argument. I think that, you know, when I explain it, the argument itself will make perfect sense at least. And I ruined it with edgy, contrarian, devil's advocate nonsense.
While being labeled a brain rot debate bro isn't as bad as being known as a potential predator, this defense does little to explain the content of his goon folder. That doesn't mean what he said here isn't true though. He took what he thought was a rational argument, then intentionally made it convoluted, contrarian, and obtuse in an attempt to sound edgy and raw. These clips from Vaush, which unfortunately I can't play due to TOS, are the epitome of a recent tactic in online politics. Say something completely out of pocket and find a way to rationalize it. Another example would be Hassan's "America deserved that" one attack in September 2001.
America deserved, dude. I'm saying it.
This reckless, degenerate approach to discussion is for the purpose of building a brand through controversy, not for handling real issues. This approach is one often taken by political streamers, journalists, and other media figures, especially when they're trying to gain traction. The impact of this backwards discourse in media is indirect in regards to the adult entertainment industry, affecting how we think and talk about this topic and others. Vaush's defense of being a brain-rotten debate bro seeking controversy says a lot about the current state of media and online discussion. It's hard to find balanced perspectives on many topics these days, especially when it comes to adult content. The intentional twisting of words for the sake of outrage in media only makes it more difficult to have a reasonable conversation. Twitch, Twitter, and TikTok are all platforms which, in some way, play into the adult entertainment industry. One of the problems with this is that all of these apps are used by children, yet there's plenty of promotion of suggestive content to be found. Let's start with Twitch. Twitch recently had a drastic yet brief change to their terms of service. Artistic nudity was allowed. This opened the floodgates for a vast number of creators from different communities to test to see how far they could take this. Some communities were treated more strictly than others, making a complete mess of the new guidelines. Not only did Twitch display some of the worst platform consistency I've ever seen, but people's homepages were filled with this artistic nudity. Twitch already had a bad reputation regarding hot tub streams and inconsistent TOS enforcement. The artistic nudity situation only made things worse. There's a reason why sites like Twitch and Twitter are used to promote explicit material, to attract a potential new market share of children. This is something Shuanhead talks about in her video on the Twitch thought epidemic.
Why doesn't Twitch just make a new 18+ site? They do this on Twitch because the market is already saturated on actual porn cam sites. They won't stand out. They can find a larger, younger audience on Twitch.
There are tons of websites that are made specifically for adult content. Why don't these e-girls use those sites instead? Because those sites are oversaturated with adult content and aim for the already targeted demographic of adults. On Twitch, suggestive content stands out, and the audience is filled with lonely, screen-addicted kids. The policy change around artistic nudity was reversed only a week later. Now, finding more suggestive content on Twitch isn't quite as easy, but it's still pretty easy. And even with channels that aren't as suggestive, there's still the parasocial angle to consider. Twitch isn't quite as bad as it was during that week, but who knows when they'll roll out another reckless set of guideline changes. Although, even at its worst, you're not going to randomly stumble over hardcore DP or anything like that. With Twitter, this is a real possibility. Twitter is a nightmare of a platform for various reasons. The premise behind the platform, bite-sized character-limited posts provided in an ever-scrolling feed, thrives off of impulsive, hostile discourse. Twitter has been dealing with all kinds of problems for quite some time now. One of the common criticisms of Twitter is how saturated the site is with explicit material. If a certain post is gaining traction, often memes, it's not uncommon to see someone promoting their lewds and nudes in the replies. It is initially censored, but only requires a click to reveal. Sometimes an account may post a pornographic photo or video without marking it as sensitive material, meaning that not only is it uncensored, but it's also shown to underage users. The only tool that helps here is the report button, and it's hard to say how often this content does or does not get reported. This raises another issue. Even if Twitter did change its age limit to 18 plus only, how difficult would it be for someone younger to circumvent the age restriction? If given free access to the internet, probably not difficult at all. Realistically, the best approach to internet usage starts from home. Since these so-called child-friendly websites can still show explicit content and worse, connect children with strangers, supervision is key. Parents should be fully aware of the potential consequences of social media and unrestricted internet access. More than half of the kids in America are on TikTok. Its short-form framework, easy-to-use effects, potential for virality, as well as its roots in music and dancing are what make it a successful app, especially with the younger crowd. Children make up about a third of TikTok's overall user base, making it popular across generations. Twitter is also popular among different age groups, but isn't as popular with kids. On Twitter, children feel out of place, like a kid in a bar. The general feeling is, you shouldn't be here, go ride a bike or something. On TikTok, adults are more likely to feel out of place, like a grown man in a McDonald's play place. The general feeling is, this is creepy. Not every adult that uses TikTok is a creep, but given the fact that provocative dances are a regular trend and the popularity of TikTok amongst kids, there's room for nefarious behavior. A YouTube video titled Exposing TikTok's Massive Predator Community shows in detail how some TikTok accounts were compiling suggestive underage content and using certain phrases to signal their gross intent behind sharing the material. I'll leave a link to that video in the description. There's also the issue of TikTok's impact on culture. This is a second-hand anecdotal observation, so take this part with a grain of salt. A friend of mine regularly visits Japan. Japan has a much higher population density than America, so you're generally more likely to see how people act in public. Something he noticed was that it was common to see a young girl in a public place, whether that be a bus stop, a park, or what have you, filming herself, most likely on TikTok, doing a provocative dance, oblivious to the rest of the world, often doing more than one take so they'd awkwardly interrupt and resume their dancing. These girls were usually 14 to 18 years old. The amount of emphasis social media puts on beauty standards and attention at such young ages is insane. People like Charli D'Amelio make TikTok seem like a real opportunity for fame and fortune for children. Why wouldn't they want to put more of themselves out there if it could potentially make them a celebrity? One way this competition for attention takes place is through appearance. Body image is something that affects everyone, although women are more concerned with their appearance than men. Some sources say 46% of girls worry about it compared to 25% of boys. Other sources say 20 to 40% of women are dissatisfied with their bodies compared to 10 to 30% of men. All sources that I've seen show that this is more common with women. Whether this has more to do with societal norms or biology, I'm not sure. Adult content can have a negative impact on body image, although it's far from the only factor. The internet has made it easier than ever before to find someone who is extraordinarily attractive and compare ourselves to them. Continuously comparing oneself to others can cause stress, insecurity, etc. Like with adult content itself, this isn't new, it's just that we have far more access today, making it easier to form bad habits around body image and content consumption. Instead of comparing our looks to the occasional model or actor, social media has essentially gamified attractiveness amongst friends, colleagues, and the rest of the world. Not satisfied with the way a selfie looks, trying to get more engagement for validation? Just touch that picture up. Filters, effects, and other editing tools are in abundance. After all, everyone else is doing it, so don't get left behind. Unsurprisingly, if you were to upload a photo of yourself, editing it and adding filters doesn't make you feel any more attractive. According to Breakfast Television, this is because when people edit their own photos, they tend to focus on their perceived flaws. I think it's a bit more simple than that. People are aware that editing pictures of themselves doesn't actually change their physical appearance. This creates an interesting problem. If more and more people are editing photos to make them themselves look better, yet it isn't making them feel better about themselves, the standard of beauty is being raised with no positive effect on self-esteem. Although uploading an edited selfie doesn't improve self-esteem, it does raise the standard of beauty that others will compare themselves to. It makes self-comparison more drastic. Our body image is vital to our health. Our attitude towards ourselves greatly affects our mood and outlook on life. Not only is constant comparison and self-doubt unpleasant and unhealthy, it can become a compulsive habit. Obsessing over how attractive you are and how other people perceive you is a good way to become miserable. A neurotic fascination with vanity doesn't make anyone more charming. There is a balance. You should pay some attention to your looks, enough to develop a sense of style and to notice any changes. I should shave. I should get some new clothes. I've been eating too many carbs. But you shouldn't pay so much attention to your looks that it becomes your utmost priority and a major source of anxiety. If you're focusing on your appearance to the point it makes your insecurities worse, that's a problem. The adult entertainment industry itself certainly isn't good for body image, and the culture surrounding the industry doesn't help either. Even for women who don't watch adult content, on the internet the amount of emphasis put on appearance and objectification is overwhelming. How you feel about yourself and how you treat your body are far more important than social media numbers. In contrast to the topic of body image, which is more focused on women, the conversation about dopamine and masturbation is more focused on men. There isn't a large movement of female nofappers like there is with men. The subreddit nofap has over 1 million members, while nofap women is sitting below 2,000 members. There are some claims of problems with over-consuming adult content from women online. They're just not as common as men's claims. This makes sense considering the target demographic for most adult content is male. Because of this focus on men, there's more information about men struggling with overconsumption than women. That being said, this section primarily focuses on the male perspective. As I mentioned earlier, dopamine is responsible for pleasure and in turn motivation and learning. Think about a dog in training. Their reward system is similar to ours, also utilizing dopamine. Their language center isn't as complex, but they can differentiate syllables and commands. They can learn to recognize their own name. When you first get a new puppy, they're not going to know any of this. In fact, you'll be in good shape if they don't stain the carpet or tear up the sofa. So how do you house train them? Through rewarding their good behavior. This can include pets, walks, treats, and playtime. If your dog is behaving well, especially if they did the desired action after a command, reward them to reinforce that behavior. Not only does this let your dog know when they did something right, they wind up associating that behavior with positive feelings over time. At some point, you won't have to reinforce the behavior as much because they've been able to make a connection between action and reward themselves. If you say sit, they will sit, and they'll be happy to do so. Humans learn in the same reward-driven way. Grades in school don't just serve as a means to measure quality of work, they also function as rewards. The feeling of approval and success after getting an A is enough motivation for many students to continue to put effort into their studies. Now, if one of these students started to get into gambling, for example, their motivation to study is going to be impaired. While in terms of addiction, gambling doesn't introduce a chemical component like drug use does, gambling is still an unusually dopaminergic activity. The rush of winning a jackpot is way more potent than the wild thrill of solving an equation and getting a good grade. Your sensitivity to dopamine will decrease, basically increasing your tolerance to your own natural reward system, to your own happiness. Since humans are wired to seek pleasure over pain, and solving math problems at this point would take an aggravating amount of effort before a comparatively small reward is provided, gambling becomes the preferred behavior. It doesn't take as much effort and is more dopaminergic. This forms a habit that is difficult to change. Consuming adult content affects our brains in a similar way. After jerking it, dopamine is spiked, along with an increase in something called prolactin. Prolactin is a hormone responsible for a lot of things, but the main point here is that prolactin decreases arousal. The dopamine spike and prolactin increase are responsible for what is now referred to as post-nut clarity. There's something to be said about testosterone as well, but there are many conflicting perspectives on that. If a man is whacking it on the daily, they're going to be in a state of perpetual post-nut clarity. Pursuing women will seem like an uncomfortable option that's just not worth it. If they're already in a relationship, intimacy is probably going to be less frequent. The standard for what is enjoyable and what is worth doing will change for the worse. A passion for learning and competition is replaced with lethargy and complacency, which often turns into resentment. Objectification from a distance becomes the norm, and isolation has room to settle in. The psychology of addiction leads to social interference. We are far more susceptible to influence than we'd like to think. Even rebellious types and outsiders are subject to influence in some way. Society affects our behavior, and our behavior affects society. Like anything else, societal issues don't start in a vacuum. If we think back 30 years or so, the issue of adult content was very different, as was society. A teenager back then might have just had a dirty magazine hidden under their mattress. Anything beyond that was rare. Now it's typical for a kid to have watched hours of hardcore material before entering puberty. The nature of adult content itself isn't the only thing that has changed though. The way the media operates is different. The economy is more volatile, the way we communicate has changed. The pandemic has changed the course of social development. Loneliness is on the rise, our culture has splintered in 1,000 directions. It's just not the same world. Let's look at the recent Twitch TOS drama again. The site got way too lax with nudity, and it's supposedly kid-friendly, which led to Twitch getting significant backlash. What does progressive political streamer and OF model Denims have to say about all of this? Do straight men even like women? Maybe she didn't realize the greater point being made about children on Twitch, but that should have been obvious. Either she responded to the Twitch TOS discourse before knowing what people's issue with it was, or she was being willfully ignorant and dense. Either way, she chose a rage bait response that ignores the real issue at hand. This is a rather minor example of the kind of provoking nonsense that takes place on sites like Twitter. It's easy to find plenty of men hating women and women hating men on the internet. There's always been some level of tension between men and women, which is natural. Now with social media, people have more opportunities to validate and encourage hostility. If people didn't take the internet too seriously, this wouldn't be as much of an issue, but the way men and women talk to and about each other online does have a real-world impact. The general insecurities of either group are used against them as a means to a quick win. She's just a gassed-up mid. He's not a real man. Our sense of desirability is tied to our pride and vanity, so it's easy to dwell on these comments if they're making fun of our integrity as a partner. This causes a feedback loop of resentment, both strengthening the us versus them dynamic between men and women and exacerbating the issues these groups experience separately. We all live on Earth together, and we need each other for it to function. Yet the way some often write off the opposite gender is akin to tribalism, especially on social media, even though it's in our best interest to see each other thrive and succeed. In general, women don't want a husband who can't stop themselves from watching erotic material, and men don't want a wife whose job it is to pleasure other men. Instead of communicating this properly, insults are thrown, which can cause the other side to dig their heels in further. This toxic dynamic online spreads to younger generations, teaching them at an impressionable age that division, hostility, objectification, and materialism are the norm. A child's developing years are crucial and shouldn't be disrupted by this toxic environment. The research examining social development and social media is still rather limited, although it should be obvious that by changing the way we and our children communicate, we're changing the way we learn to socialize. One way this change presents itself is in the increasing number of men who haven't learned how to approach women.
There is a girl that I find attractive that I either know or don't know or partly know or whatever.
Yeah.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you. Is kind of like a miniature war that you have to go to, and the felt sense of palpable fear is just ripping you apart inside.
Approaching someone out of romantic interest is a uniquely emotional task. The arousal of seeing someone attractive, the excitement of potential, the fear of rejection, all of these feelings and more can arise before approaching someone. It takes some social experience to be able to stay cool and collected in that situation, let alone have the courage to make an appropriate move. If they do ask the other person out, there's a chance of rejection, which is painful, but there's also a chance they land a date. The social ills of today make it unsurprising that less and less men are approaching women for dates. According to research by Date Psychology, 59% of male Zoomers 18 to 25 haven't approached someone in over a year, and 45% of that same age group has never approached a woman for a date in their entire life. Some say this has to do with the Me Too movement, that there is a newfound fear of women exaggerating or falsifying claims of inappropriate behavior. Personally, I don't think this fear is all too rational, but it does exist. The media hyper-focused on a real issue in Hollywood, which is good yet has a side effect. The problem is that we're not teaching growing boys and men the difference between simply approaching a woman and what kind of behavior is being rightfully condemned in media. The wrong impression can be left by popular narratives convincing some men that prosecution and major reputational damage are common dangers of merely asking women out. Apparently, this fear is more common in the black pill community. While I believe this fear is a factor, it's a small one when compared to the impact of social media, adult content, and dating apps. The issues with social social media and adult content in this context, the topic of men approaching women, are issues I've already touched on, the lack of proper socialization and the culmination of bad habits regarding internet usage. If your main sources of socialization come from Twitch and TikTok, you're probably not going to be too smooth with the ladies. If you're compulsively jerking it, you're probably not going to feel motivated to develop these necessary social skills. Dating apps like Tinder only make these problems worse. About 20 or 30 years ago, it was far more common to date someone through work, through friends, to meet someone at a bar, etc. There was more of an in-person social network which was used to befriend and date others. Now, looking at this graph, it looks like the internet has completely dwarfed all of the other ways we use to find relationships. Sure, the internet is more accessible, but it's just not human. This aromantic way of finding love is a bit detached. Even if you do spend time learning how to best optimize your matches on Tinder, those skills aren't going to help you navigate a face-to-face interaction with someone who is basically a stranger. Having an enjoyable conversation on a first date is way different than messaging someone on a dating app or reassessing your Tinder profile. Knowing the different interpretations of an emoji just isn't the same as being able to pick up true in-person social cues. Most men across all age groups who don't approach women regret not doing so, roughly 60% across the board. Here's the good news. Roughly 3 out of 4 women between the ages of 18 and 40 wish they were approached by men more. Asking someone out can be nerve-wracking for both people involved, but these fears are mostly irrational. There is no reason to feel guilt or shame for asking someone out in an appropriate manner, even if their rejection is oddly hostile or hurtful. The fear of rejection is incredibly common. There's a lot to potentially dwell on after being rejected. Am I ugly? Am I awkward? Who are they going to tell about this embarrassing interaction? Will everyone respond to me this way? Will I ever find love? For the black pill community, the blame falls squarely on physical attractiveness. When I talked about body image before, I focused on women. However, this group of men is focused on masculine features, like a strong jawline, tall height, substantial muscle density. The list goes on. The concept of looks maxing, doing as many routines as possible to maximize your appearance, leaves out the idea of social development altogether. Looking good definitely helps in the dating world, but character and confidence are essential, whether it's a fringe group like the black pill community or a popular sentiment of empowerment. Media has a lot of influence on our society. The topics of OF models, adult content, and relationship issues have taken center stage, likely due to the increasing frustration with the dating world and our inherent interest in these matters. The prevalence of adult entertainment itself, as well as the popularity of the narratives surrounding it, give this industry an unusual amount of influence. With sites like Twitch and Twitter, this influence reaches even further. At this point in the video, I was going to rehash some instances of e-drama having to do with adult content and how the internet reacted to them. The section got too bloated and clunky, so I decided to cut it. Without going into excessive detail, the point I was trying to make is that streamers, political pundits, and other media figures rarely talk about adult content with any level of nuance. Many of the more family-friendly figures will defend the industry blindly, and many of the more edgy figures are haphazard with their criticisms of the industry. These thoughtless takes from larger figures shape the way we think and talk about these issues, unfortunately. Adult content has an immense amount of influence over our society. Kids are watching it, it's an incredibly popular topic in media, it's shared and talked about over standard social media sites like Twitter, the subject matter pertains to just about everyone in some way, and the concept of shame is becoming more twisted and confused. It is necessary for us to ask where this culture is taking us, even if others aren't willing. Conscientiousness is a personality trait associated with diligence, awareness, and willpower. It's being able to make a schedule and sticking to it. It's knowing when it's time to stop playing video games and time to start doing chores. Those who are more conscientious are less likely to fall into patterns of addiction. According to this graph, addicts are less likely to be agreeable and conscientious, and more likely to be open, extroverted, and neurotic. Neuroticism being associated with anxiety, depression, and self-doubt. While measuring personalities is rather subjective, the Ocean model gives us an easy way to talk about behavior and personality here. According to a study referenced by NBC News, adults 64 and under saw declines in extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. Adults under 30 also saw an increase in neuroticism during that period. Keeping both studies in mind, the only change here that would be associated with less addictive behavior would be the decrease in extroversion, which is representative of the loneliness epidemic. Loneliness to this degree history doesn't help with impulsive behavior. As the general mental health of our nation and much of the world declines, we are more subject to addictive behaviors. Outlets for addiction are becoming more available, satisfying, and fine-tuned. Technology makes these things more accessible than ever, even to children still in development. This is a key concern. If there weren't so many other problems with the internet, social development, education, and aimlessness, then adult content probably wouldn't be much of an issue. But today, it's another obstacle that poses much more risk now than it would in a more stable world. This leads to an embarrassing admission though. Just how prone are we to marketing psychology and the whims of the cultural climate? After all, when Morgpie was getting called out during the Twitch TOS artistic nudity drama, the tweet of her dancing got more than 70k bookmarks. Some of those people probably just wanted to save the article, but it's likely that most of those bookmarks are for gooning purposes. I'll admit there have been times when I've clicked on a YouTube short just because there's an attractive woman in the thumbnail. I know it's a stupid impulse, but still, sometimes I click. The word shame carries a lot of negative weight. The dictionary definition is a painful feeling of humiliation or distress caused by the consciousness of wrong or foolish behavior. It's not a good feeling, but it's necessary to help ourselves regulate what is deemed as acceptable in society. An appropriate level of shame is how I know it's okay to admit that I've clicked on thirst traps before, but also know that it's not okay to be prideful about it or to embrace that behavior. A lack of shame is being unaware of the outcomes people generally want to see in a civilization. The act of abandoning all tradition and shame for the sake of blind progress betrays the history of humanity and our psychology. Our natural shame is something we need to work with, not against. Attempting to repress shame isn't enough to stop this force of nature. Shame still winds up taking place in different ways. Instead of a man being shamed for not being loyal and diligent, he's shamed for not sleeping around enough and his lack of immense wealth and grand status. An industry which claims to advocate for female empowerment seems to make beauty standards more emphasized and imposing. The adult entertainment industry is just that, an economic industry. They want to protect their profits, and for their business model, that means the less we consider the potential effects of their business, the better. This video wound up taking a lot more time and research than anticipated. I feel like for every question I've sought to answer, another one pops up. There just isn't as much research or information out there as there should be. If you're going to watch adult content, at least understand there are potential risks and try to avoid overconsumption, like with any other addictive behavior. Although I'd recommend not watching it at all. In the words of Gerbert Johnson, it's never too soon to stop the goon. If you've already developed solid social skills and have some relationship experience, I would imagine there's a lower chance that watching adult content would cause a problem, although this is merely speculation. I believe the people who are at the most risk are the youth and socially underdeveloped adults. The current availability and acceptance of erotic content will only further encourage the stagnation and decay of social skills in those who haven't properly developed them, which is a good chunk of people in today's world. Alright, time to end on a bit of a white pill. Just about every comment that I've seen of someone giving up adult content has been incredibly hopeful. This isn't hard evidence of anything in particular, but I certainly don't see anyone who has regretted giving it up. I take this as a sign of the desire to exercise willpower, to be more conscientious, and to focus more on the things that matter. It's a refreshing and welcomed sentiment, which I hope to see more of. Alright, that's gonna have to do it for this one. Shout out to the best subscriber squad in all of YouTube. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
This is iDubbbz dating advice segment.
Ooh.
Huh?